Good morning, everyone. It is so good to be here. I have to admit that normally when I come to Utah, this is what I'm doing. But rest assured, I'm very happy to be here. Do I have any skiers? You guys are all quite dark right here. Any skiers in the audience? Okay, excellent. That's what I like to hear. Nothing against borders or anything. So today, we are going to talk about how managers drive productivity and retention in your business, two critical items to growth. Managers matter. Who you work for is everything. I'm going to tell you a deeply personal story to illustrate how much managers matter. Now, I have never told this story on stage, so bear with me, but illustrating the point, the cause, if you will, is important to me enough that I'm going to do it. So, for 16 years now, I've suffered from anxiety and depression. It all started in 2008. My doctor ordered me to take medical leave from work. My roommates at the time asked me to leave. I hadn't slept in months. I had really hit rock bottom. Now, how did I get here? I was working a ton. I was 26 years old, and I was determined to get 26 megawatts of solar behind the meter. Months before I took medical leave, we had signed what was the largest, at the time, the largest solar project in any school district in New York, in the country. It was written up in the New York Times. So by all means, I was way too attached to my career, and I had no idea how to put boundaries in place. But that was not the only thing that got me there. The night the board approved the contract for that deal, we went out with the client to celebrate. We had some drinks, and the executive sponsor of the client proceeded to hit on me. I was devastated. It felt like he took my power away. The best analogy I can come up with is imagine you just won the national championship, and then the ref pulls you aside and says, I just want to let you know, I called that game for you. I wanted you to win. I told my boss what had happened. He said, don't worry about it. I'm sure it's not going to happen again. Now, I'll never forget the night the signature pages came through. It was 3 weeks later, a couple weeks later, and I was so excited. We had gotten, at the time, one of the largest banks in the United States, let alone the world, one of the largest energy companies in the world, and one of the largest school districts in the country to agree to deal terms on a deal structure that had never been done before. I remember I'm sitting at my cubicle at 7:30 at night, and I can hear my boss coming down the corridor. I look up, I say, Jack, we did it. It just happened. The signature pages are in. He leaned over my cubicle, and he said, well done. Now let's go get the next one. So 3 weeks later, I'm on my way to an event. I got to go get the next deal done. All of a sudden, I find myself up against the median. I look across, and all I can see is another car 3 lanes across the highway on the side of the road. My car was completely totaled. I called my boss to let him know what had happened. At the time, the company I worked for was obsessed with safety metrics. It was imperative to the business. And so he prompted to tell me that it never happened, and don't tell anyone ever that this happened. So somehow I was okay. I found a ride to the event. 2 weeks later, I bought the exact same car, and no one ever knew. When I came back from medical leave, everybody thought I had taken vacation. It's like, how was it? Where'd you go? If only they knew those were some of the most painful months of my life. So I opened up this conversation today, how managers drive productivity and retention. Well, I certainly wasn't productive for those 3 months on medical leave. And even though I came back to that company, it took me a long time to get back to being productive again. So after 10 more years of amazing operating experience, those experiences that I had such an impact on me and how I view the world that I decided to start Elevate Leadership, where we're on a mission to help managers be the kind of manager they would want to work for. So management matters. And we all have our stories. I just shared mine. So I want you to think for a second. I want you to think of a manager that you've had at some point in your career that really increased your productivity. You worked harder because of them. You were more engaged because of them. They enabled you to do your best work. Or I want you to think of a manager that you really felt like you couldn't do your best work under. You were not as productive. Maybe you even left the company you're working for at the time because of your manager. So just think for a second. Maybe raise your hand so I know when you've thought of someone. Awesome, thanks. Give you one more second. Appreciate it. Okay, so don't do it yet. What I want you to do is I actually want you to turn to the person next to you, say hello. I realize some of you are sitting alone, so please feel free to get up, but don't go yet. And I want you, if you feel comfortable, just share that story. Share the story of how a manager increased your productivity or decreased your productivity, or maybe you even had to leave the company as a result, or you decided to do so. So I'm gonna give you 3 minutes each. Don't worry, I'll tell you when it's time to swap. But why don't you get up, find someone, introduce yourself, share your story. You each have 3 minutes. Okay, thanks for sharing those. So can anybody just raise their hand? Who shared a story about how they had a manager who really increased their productivity? Any hands? Anyone have a positive experience? Great, excellent. I'm so happy to hear it. Awesome. What about, did anybody share how they ultimately decided to leave a company because of their manager? Anybody? Okay. Actually, it seemed like we had more hands on that than the other. Okay. So, as I said, managers drive retention and they drive productivity. Okay, so we all have our stories. Thank you again for doing that. And it turns out we're not alone. So, managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement. Now, why do we care so much about employee engagement? Because teams that have a higher engagement have a 30% increase. I feel like this isn't working very well. Have a 30% increase in reduced turnover. So they have better retention when the teams are more engaged. So you know that saying, people leave managers, not companies? There's data to back that statement up. Turnover is incredibly expensive. I'm just curious, does anyone in their own business ever put a dollar value to the cost of turnover? Anybody internally? Maybe one or two. I ask this all the time and no one ever does. I think it's because the number gets quite scary when you add it up. It gets quite big. But if you think about it, it's super expensive, right? You get the loss of institutional knowledge. Often you have to pay recruiting fees, and then you've got to pay for ramp time. And so on average, the cost to replace an employee can range anywhere from half of that employee's salary to 2.5 times. It's incredibly expensive. The other reason we care about employee engagement is that engaged teams experience an 18% lift in productivity. Harvard did a study where they saw that a 10% gain in manager effectiveness equated to a 14% gain in productivity. So again, managers impact productivity and they impact retention. Okay, so if we think managers are so important, we know who you work for is everything, then how do we develop great managers? We got to figure this out. So at Elevate, we have been fortunate enough to spend thousands of hours coaching leaders, and we've trained thousands of managers at some of the fastest growing companies in the US, let alone the world, like Stripe and Anthropic and I don't know. We've been fortunate to work with a lot of companies, great companies. And through all of that experience, we've boiled down what it takes to be a great manager into 4 core areas. And I'm going to share that with you. The good news is management is learned. We have seen it. We've seen the numbers. We've seen the results. It is not rocket science. It's about doing the small things well and doing them consistently. Now, there is one caveat to the fact that management is learned, and that is you have to want to be a manager for the right reason. In order to be a great manager, you must have an orientation towards others. So next time you're mentoring someone or someone in your company raises their hand and says, I want to be a manager, dig in and just make sure that they want that next rung in the ladder. They want to be a manager for the right reasons. They truly find joy in helping others. I always say that moving from an individual contributor to a manager to management is not just another rung in the ladder. It's truly a career change. And that career is not for everyone, and that's totally fine. But if it is for them, then here are the 4 core areas that make a great manager. Managers need to be able to build trust. It is the foundation of any relationship. They need to be able to build trust with individuals and with teams. And this is learned. There are frameworks to do this. They also need to be able to set directions. Great managers need to set goals that make sense. They need to get everybody aligned. They need to communicate clearly what good looks like. And they need to delegate. They have to work through others. Great managers need to be able to develop others. They need to understand that when it comes to management, there is no one-size-fits-all. They must learn to flex their management depending on the skill and the will of their direct report on any given project. They need to be able to learn how to coach and not just direct. And they need to be able to really understand, ultimately, where does that person want to go in their career? What motivates them? So they can match the current day-to-day job to where that person wants to go so they can help them get there. And lastly, they have to be able to manage performance. It's critical. There is no faster way to demotivate your top performer than to have a poor performer hanging around. Managers must drive accountability. They have to give both positive and constructive feedback, and they better be willing to have the tough conversations. So those are your 4 core areas that make a great manager. Now, my mother taught me to never show up in anyone's house without a gift. And today is not the day that I'm going to let her down. So I have something for you, and I'm going to give you a QR code in a minute so that you can unwrap your gift, if you will. Before I do that, I'm just going to show you what's in your gift. So I've given you at least one class of ours in each one of those 4 areas. You can teach someone on your team to give feedback really effectively in 10 minutes. It is rooted in neuroscience, it has an actionable framework, but it is not rocket science. When you log in, it's going to be super intuitive. Below the video, I've also given you a 1-page class summary, and I've given you a discussion guide. And how you can use that is you just gather your team, use it during a regularly scheduled team meeting, just watch the class together, use the discussion guide to ask, to reflect on it, and have a conversation together about the content and about how you can apply it. How can everybody on the team give each other more feedback? And how are you going to hold each other accountable? I'd love it if you shared this with your people team. In addition to the discussion guide, I've given you a facilitator guide, so that enables you to take that 10-minute class and turn it into an interactive workshop that lasts maybe 45 minutes. The key here is that management training does not have to take forever. You don't have to take people out of the work for days on end, and it doesn't have to break the bank. So here is your gift. So please take out your phone. If you're too far away, then you can just type that into your browser. I am asking for your contact information. I will not bug you. I'm just here to help you. It is so that we can actually deliver the videos to you. And the next thing we're going to talk about is how do you now develop managers at scale in a way that lasts? And I'm going to share with you a simple framework that we've developed after lots of iteration, because we've rolled out hundreds of management training programs at scale. So here's a really simple framework. 5 stages. Stage 1, the baseline. Hopefully, you already have manager expectations in place. But if you don't, I encourage you to create them. What this does is it just clearly communicates what's expected of everyone and what good looks like. And then you need to measure your current performance against those expectations. You can make this super simple. Just send out a survey, have the manager self-assess, ask their direct reports to evaluate their managers versus the manager expectations. That sets your baseline in which you can measure future progress against. The next stage, stage 2, is the why. We have to make this matter. Otherwise, don't do it, right? So it's really important to communicate why. Why do we have these expectations? Why are we investing in this training? How is this going to ultimately drive the business results that we need to? And I really encourage that this come from the CEO or functional leader of the group. This is where you really motivate and you connect the dots for your teams. Stage 3 is the what. This is the training. Whether it's coaching, it's micro-learning, it's workshops. We need to set people up for success. We need to give them what they need, when they need it, so they apply it. We need to map training to the manager journey. So when it's time for goal setting, train on goal setting. When it's performance review season, I gave you that class, by the way, it is time to do training on that. The last stage, or the second to last stage, is accountability. We have to hold people accountable. We have to hold ourselves accountable. And so you really do want to measure your progress versus that baseline. And then ideally, those manager expectations are pulled through even to your performance review. And lastly, we have to make it scale. It's got to be built to scale. It can't just be a one-time event. And the companies that we've worked with that have really transformed the culture of how they operate and have driven incredible business results, the way they do it is they create a common management language. If you think about it, in particular with management, all we really know is what we experienced, and we all have different experiences. And so it's really valuable and important that you at your company come up with a common management language, a common management experience, such that if I have a one-on-one with my manager and I find it very productive, I get what I need out of it, and I get actionable feedback, I'm very likely to use similar structure with my direct report. So if we create a common experience that works, it reinforces itself. This also means, though, that when you promote someone into management or you hire someone in, even if they're senior, they need to also understand that language. That micro-learning needs to be in their welcome doc, their onboarding docs. So here is a simple framework that if you follow, it works. And I'll just share a quick little story of a company we've been working with recently who implemented this framework, and just so you can see it in real life. Okay, so has anybody heard of Future by chance? Great company. It's basically a personalized, physical trainer in your phone. It's very effective. So they're a VC-backed company, so you can imagine they have no option but to grow. The majority of their employee base are these physical trainers, these coaches. And as they grow, they take their top-performing coaches, and now they need to manage. Sound familiar? But of course, they've never managed before. So, you roll the clock a little bit, and things aren't going quite as you want them to go. And you also need these managers to drive key business results, like client retention and sign-up conversion rates. And so what they did is they ran a survey to figure out what their gaps are. They communicated the why. The coaches clearly understood what business metrics they need to move and why that matters. And then they rolled out a program. It was 15 weeks. It was 1 hour a week. They used the micro-learning that you now have. They used the facilitator guide, which you also have. And they ran 1 hour workshops once a week. They made sure that what that coach was learning or manager was learning was directly applicable to their day-to-day so they could immediately apply it and they could also start to see the business results. So within 6 months' time, those managers increased their ability to manage performance by 35%, and they improved client retention by 6%, and they increased sign-up conversion by 9%. So that more than paid for itself. So today, we have talked about how managers drive retention and productivity. We shared our own stories. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for allowing me to share mine. We looked at the numbers, right? We're not alone. Managers account for 70% of the variance in employee engagement. We talked about, so how do we develop great managers, right? What are the 4 core areas? They need to build trust, they need to set expectations, they need to know how to develop others, and they need to manage performance. I gave you a playbook, I gave you a toolkit, so you literally can go home and when you're back in your office or back online, if you will, you can run a session with your team, you can watch it together, you can have a conversation, you can share it with your people team. So I have a request. Actually just stretch your legs. Who is willing to go watch one of those classes with their team or share it with their people team and encourage them to run an interactive workshop? It's all set up for them on performance reviews or how to delegate effectively or how to give feedback. Stand up if you're willing to give it a go. Thank you. Thank you for helping managers be the kind of manager they would want to work for. If anybody wants to talk skiing or management training, I'll be here all day. Love to connect with you. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.